Hey, hello, how are you? This is a show for everyone else. Instead of going after top 1% of the world, we dedicate this podcast to celebrate the lives of the unsung heroes and self-made artists.
That just gave me a different perspective on life, and a different outlook. And I was like, jeepers, it is so short and you never know when it's going to get taken away. It's literally it's not in your control, basically. You have to start. You don't know how good you're going to be until you actually start. And you're always going to be very average when you start, and you just need to kind of accept that. People learn mostly from other stories, and they can really relate to people's stories. And there's always something within a story that people go, wow, that's amazing. Or, yes, I know what you're talking about. You've got to strip away all the ego, anything that you ever have. If you want to progress, you've just got to constantly be evolving. Patience is going to eventually win. You have to have extraordinary amounts of it in terms of whatever you're doing, because nothing happens as quickly as you want it to. And you always need to take a step back and recalibrate when times are difficult and remember why you're doing this.
Hi there, what's going on? This is Fei Wu, and I'm the host for this podcast called Feisworld, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. Today, we have a regular interview episode. We put in a lot of effort into producing these longer form interview episodes, and I truly hope that they will add value to your personal and professional life. And as always, I look forward to hearing from you. We can be reached at Feisworld everywhere on social media, and also hello@feisworld.com. Well, today, Gareth Martin is our interviewee. He is a podcaster and executive lifestyle coach. Born and raised in beautiful South Africa, now living in London in the UK. So moving to London was a decision he made in his late teens after visiting the city. He fell in love and decided to stay. After finding himself working as a banker for a very long time, Gareth decided to build his own business. He's the type of person who lights up every room. He's engaging, optimistic, and incredibly warm. He talks about that there are many motivational people out there who explain the importance of having a purpose and a why in life. With the decisions he faces, which influences and defines his life, he always likes to ask himself, why not? So we want to pause, or perhaps as you're listening to this episode, ask yourself, what is your why not? When he was 16, he experienced the worst physical setback which has ever happened to him. It also ended up being one of the best life lessons a person could have. On July the 7th, 1997, just before 7 p.m., Gareth was hit head-on by a car driven by a drunk driver. He was hit while traveling at about 80 kilometers per hour on his Yamaha motorbike. Since then, and each day, he reminds himself to be thankful for being alive. I can relate to his story also as a teenager who chose to immigrate and live in a foreign country without our parents. It was a daring act and turned our world upside down in a good way, because it taught us resilience and how to adapt the world around us. In 2018, I had the pleasure to meet Gareth in person in London and had a blast. That is, and will always remain, to be my favorite part of starting my podcast. And that is to meet guests and you, listeners, in person. Many of you out there are doing interesting things already. It's a privilege to have the time and money to work on our passion project. We are only human, and most of us want to see growth and purpose right away. But building a small business isn't always glamorous. It often isn't. Yet, mass media will continue to show us what we want to see, the shortcuts, the overnight success stories. It's the same thing as winning the lottery, and trying to win the lottery isn't a strategic plan. Instead, Gareth helps pinpoint what you can do to control your destiny, and most importantly, have fun along the way. Not everyone is ready to be vulnerable about their path to success or failure, and we are on a path with stories and learnings that are so worth capturing. Gareth is doing that with his podcast, the Ridiculously Human Podcast, and me with Feisworld. Our podcasts and each episode within it is quite like leaving the M&M trails behind us, and it's easy to look back on the path we've gone on and see what worked and what didn't, and continue to be open-minded about trying new things that may or may not work. I think this is the true power of starting that blog, that podcast, that YouTube channel, then sitting with yourself for recollections of our precious memories. Without further ado, please welcome the unforgettable, genuine, and ridiculously human Gareth Martin to the Feisworld podcast. When I saw your kid or nickname as your middle name being China, I mean, it immediately intrigued me because I'm Chinese. And all of a sudden I was thinking like, is he like a quarter Chinese? Or what is this relationship to China? So
that's classic.
Explain.
Yeah, no, for sure. So basically in Johannesburg, all guys call each other China. And, well, not all guys, but a lot of us do, a lot of us that are real Johannesburg guys. And it's because it actually originates from British rhyming slang or Cockney slang. So China plate stands for mate. And that's what, and then we, I guess, in South Africa, shortened it to just saying China. So all the guys will always walk around going, "Hey, how's it going, my China?" The interesting story is actually when I moved to London about 20 years ago, I moved into a house with all these Australian guys and I started playing Australian rules football with them. And there was always like 80 to 100 guys at training. It was like amazing. And I was the South African guy, like 18 years old, running around going, "Kick the ball to me, China, kick the ball to me, China." And Australians, as they are, they just love nicknames. So China became my nickname because I called everyone China. So literally, I haven't been able to get rid of it, but I love it now. Like that's what people know me as, China, and I really like the nickname. So that's why I use that on Facebook as well.
I love your story, and I love your recent writing on Medium, and it's different. Sometimes as a podcaster or blogger, myself, and which you are one as well, we don't always have the time or sometimes the tendency to write long form articles to really reflect our lives. Because, I think we all fall into not really a trap, but sort of the formula of listening to other people's stories, putting our guests, everyone else at first. So I was really intrigued by the stories you've been sharing. Some of that I know from the fact that you moved from South Africa to London and to England, and that was a pretty big deal. Could you tell us a bit about that decision? Because you haven't even gone to college at that point, and you're fairly young, and it was a pretty significant move at distance and culturally.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe if I just take it back a step before that. So when I was 16 years old, me and my friends always used to have motorbikes, and we used to ride around on our motorbikes, and that's what we kind of did. And I actually had a very serious motorbike accident when I was 16, and it was me. I was on my bike, and then behind me was my best friend on his motorbike, and it was a Thursday afternoon, 4:00 in the afternoon or something. We had just finished gym. And basically, I got hit by a drunk driver. And I was pretty much like on my deathbed, basically. But fortunately, behind us, there was an ambulance, or not even an ambulance, a guy that worked for the ambulance, and he was off duty on his way home. And if it wasn't for that guy, basically, I wouldn't be here today having this conversation with you. So I was basically resuscitated and taken to hospital and survived eventually, but with like some quite serious injuries. And I think that just gave me a different perspective on life, and a different outlook. And I was like, jeepers, it is so short, and you never know when it's going to get taken away. It's literally not in your control, basically. So then when it came to high school, like the end of high school, my last year of high school, I went to the UK. It was my first overseas trip. And we went to the UK on a rugby trip. And it was amazing. It was like 35 of us. It was just like the best time ever. And we ended up with our last 4 days in London. And I was like, I love London. And and that just stuck with me. And then when it came to finishing school and everyone applying for university and these sort of things, I was like, wow, I don't really know what I wanted to study. I did know. I thought I wanted to study like physiotherapy. So I was like, that's what I want to do, but I want to go and see the world actually. And what better way to do it than to, go back to London where it kind of all started for me. Yeah, I was just young and naive, to be honest with you. Basically what happened is I booked a trip to go to America, which was in the middle of the year, to be a camp counselor in America. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm going to go work in America in summer, because you always see this on television. Mm-hmm. And I was going to go work in a summer camp. But then either side of that, I didn't have anything to do. So I decided to go to the UK. I guess you're young and naive, and I just packed my bags and I went. I knew a couple of people. I had a bit of family, but I'd never actually met any of these people in person. Did my stint in the UK for the first bit, went to America, worked in the summer camp, which was absolutely amazing. And then I went back to the UK and I'd moved in again with these Aussie guys that I'd met. And I just decided to stay because I was having such a good time and I was only 19 and I was like, okay, let's just see if I can stay for another year because I had a 2-year visa and that was it basically.
That was 20 years ago.
20 years ago, yeah, can you believe it?
20 years ago. And then did you say that you never went back?
I've been back on holiday.
Oh, okay.
But no, yeah, I've been back on holiday, yeah, but not to live, that's for sure.
Yeah, wow. That is a long time. I mean, how did your parents react to that when you were 18? You said, Mom and Dad, I'm really excited. Were they being supportive? Were they scared?
I think, I don't really remember. They seemed to be pretty supportive. I had a bit of a difficult sort of, my parents got divorced basically when I was quite young. And, it was a bit of a messy divorce and that was a little bit difficult. So it was kind of always hard to know how your parents felt in some sort of way. But they were definitely supportive as far as I can remember. And
that's your journey. And I find it intriguing because when you interviewed me, we spend a lot of time talking about my origin stories. And I think in so many ways, it's just so relatable that we each went from somewhere to somewhere else and without much overlap. It's, not like you spend a long time in the US or there's something really profound about that. And I noticed the fact that ever since the day one that I arrived in the US, I made it a point to really immerse myself in other people's cultures. And that was not a forceful act. I just found it to be so intriguing. The food you get to experience, the accents, the culture, little things that it's hard to put my fingers on almost. And what was it like for you to grow up? Like, now you've spent so much time on let's just say the Western world, and then to see yourself as a kid, what does it feel like?
South Africa is the most beautiful place ever. And I feel so blessed and fortunate that I grew up in South Africa. Our upbringing and our outdoors lifestyle is just the most amazing thing ever. And I actually almost feel sorry for people, say, in the UK and because they don't get to experience what we did in South Africa. You have such an amazing climate that you're always basically outside. And we're so fortunate in South Africa as well that we have this amazing wildlife. Like, you almost become... it doesn't become like a big deal because every few months you go to the bush and you spend time in the bush and you see elephants and lions and buffalo and zebras and all these amazing, incredible animals, and you almost just get used to it. This is like an hours from my house. You can drive there and you can go and you can do a game drive and see these animals. And actually, just up the road from my house in South Africa is a place called the Lion Park, and it's the coolest place ever because they have like lion cubs. And then they have also, when the lion cubs, you can actually go into the enclosure and you can literally pet them and, they'll come up to you and they're just so beautiful and so friendly. South Africa's definitely, it's got its problems, of course, but the more I see of the world these days, the more I realize that everywhere has its issues. That's for sure. I mean, we have quite a well-known history when it comes to apartheid. That was a very dark time for our country, and I grew up in it, and fortunately, while I was pretty young, apartheid was ended, and the country changed. It transformed over time, but it was a very confusing time, and it took a lot of it's still trying to figure itself out, basically.
How old were you at the time? 8, 10 years old, or even younger than that?
Yeah, no, I was 9 years old. So I think in 1990 was when it's officially ended. And then 94 was when Mandela came out of prison. And it was an incredible moment in history. Yeah, South Africa and South Africans are super proud of who they are and what they are. And but they also, that is that very dark past, which no one is happy about at all. But it was just, it was just part of our society. There's lots of good stories now, and we had some great people that came out of it, like Nelson Mandela, one of the most amazing people in the world. But there's this crossover at some point, between, say, the black cultures and the white cultures, and we feel African. Do you know what I mean? So it's in us, and we're so much stronger when we are together.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your podcast. This is like a 180 thing. You've been running your show, let's just call out the name, the Ridiculously Human podcast. And you've been running it for how many years now? 2 years?
No, well, we've done it for about 1.5 years now, so a little less than that. I think we started in October 2017 now, so
wow.
Yeah.
You guys are unstoppable. You're releasing it on a regular basis, email, all that. It's really incredible what you have learned, but you also experience so much of good, I don't want to say bad, but different styles of interviewees because, you've spoken with so many people. Unlike casual conversations at a coffee shop, we've all experienced that in our lives. And even then we know who we like and how to have a good conversation, where some people are completely unable to hold a conversation. If we break it up, what are your thoughts on the things you learn as an interviewer? What's good practice and, what's good, what's not so good, or maybe some gray area that you're still exploring as well?
So first of all, I think you have to start. You don't know how good you're going to be until you actually start. And you're always going to be very average when you start. And you just need to kind of accept that. That's a given for whatever you do in life. And for us, in terms of being a good interviewer, what we found the most important things for us is to do research. So make sure that you spend a good amount of time researching your guests so that you have a good understanding about their lives. Because our podcast is all about people's lives and their stories and things that they've done and achieved and been good at. So we have to know that for the podcast to actually go well. So research is absolutely key. There's a whole process. So being super friendly, nice, and polite on email, it sets the tone for things. So you calm the interviewee down, and they know what to expect. They're like, okay, cool. These guys they're nice, they're fun, they're polite. They've given me a good heads up. That's a good base to start off at. And then what we've found that we've done recently, or not recently, probably for about the last year, is we always had a storyboard. Like, that's the research that we did. But what we've started doing is we've actually started writing out questions as well. And when we were at Podcast Movement last year, we spoke to this girl, and she used to work in radio, and she actually gave us some really great tips. And she's like, you've got to have hook questions. So make sure that so that your listeners are intrigued from the start, and that you can start off with something big. So make sure you have a couple. We have 3 hooks: beginning, middle, end.
What does it mean to have a hook question? Like, what's an example of a hook versus non-hook question, I guess?
Okay, so it's a big question, So you can go, so Faye, tell me about when you were 16, you had just your bag, you had $500, and you got a flight to America, not knowing when you were going to come back. That's a hook question.
Okay.
As opposed to, so Faye, like the hot dogs in America, you didn't really like them much, did you? Do you know what I mean? That's just like a kind of normal question. But you use your normal questions between your hooks. Yeah. So those are probably the primary things I think when it comes to being a good interviewer. And also just making sure at the start of the call you have a bit of a setup procedure. You calm down your guest, not calm down, but I'm just saying sometimes people are a little bit nervous. So you just say, look, this is just us having a chat. It's about you. There's nothing you have to remember because it's just you, and nothing's live. We can edit stuff out if you say stuff that you don't like, and that just puts people at ease and makes them more comfortable to speak.
Hi there, you're listening to the Feisworld podcast. This is your host, Fei Wu. Born and raised in beautiful South Africa, now living in London, Gareth Martin is a podcaster and executive lifestyle coach. We met through Seth Godin's ELT MBA. Change your question, change your life. What is your why not? Wow, I love that. And I also noticed as a guest, and I also listened to a good number of your episodes, I noticed that you and your co-host, both are very into origin stories about people's lives. You just mentioned the stories, it's about their stories. So there's something very comforting about that, to ask someone about who they are as people before their names, their accomplishments, their talents, what they're known for, even before the titles. Are you a mother or father, or who you are to other people, but who you are to yourself. And that was very comforting. So was that intentional as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the reasons we started our podcast was because of stories we had been telling each other and things that had happened in our life. Like, our grandfathers had told us these amazing stories. And what we find is that people learn mostly from other stories, and they can really relate to people's stories. And there's always something within a story that people go, wow, that's amazing, or yes, I know what you're talking about. And the only way you're going to find that out is by asking them their origin story. And I think there's so much value in that. Like, humans have always learnt from each other through storytelling. Back in the day, the Bushmen used to have their campfires, and they'd sit around the fire and they'd share stories about their day hunting and this and that, and about what their ancestors used to do. And effectively what we're doing now, I guess, with our podcast is we're just telling other people's stories, or getting them to tell us their stories. And there's just something beautiful in listening to someone else's experience. And you never know, through telling your story, there's probably somebody else that is going through what you went through, and they can learn from it. They can learn how you overcame it, or whatever you did. And there's just some magic in that, I think.
Yeah, I love talking to people, and I kind of want to combine combine two questions into one, which is speaking of the techniques or preparation for a guest, for the interviewee. What are some of your advice and recommendations? Because I know there are a few things in my mind. I feel like I love it when the guests would understand certain things and kind of certain rhythm. Like, what are the things that guests could do to become better guests?
Cool. Well, basically, I think to be a good guest in that instance is, on our podcast, what we do, like I said, is we produce and put together a long storyboard. So we do probably about 2 hours research on each guest, listening to podcasts and checking websites and all these sort of things. And we send that over to our guests. And so we just say, can you please read through your storyboard here? And we often put things in red, like bold red, and with a question mark. And we say, we couldn't find much about you in this instance and phase in your life. Can you please just fill it in and tell us? So I would say that's a good one for us. So make sure that whatever request that your interviewer has sent you, you have to basically, you honor that request and do that. I think make sure that you have everything set up. Like I really liked your scheduling that you use with Acuity, where it was so like transparent and so clear for what I needed. So yeah, those are probably, and just make sure that you rock up in a good mood. If you're look decent, because for us we do video as well. Look decent, make an effort, come in a good mood, and just smile and share your story in a good way. Because this is how people are going to remember you from our podcast, at least if they listen to you.
I love that. And if I may add to that, I notice when I interview people come from all sorts of backgrounds. So some people are professional speakers, and that could go one way or the other. Sometimes they're professional and they know exactly when to pause. They speak in full sentences. Some speakers are what I literally mean, keynote speakers, and there was without much back and forth. So I've had people at the beginning who would speak for 20 minutes straight. Like we were in the same room and that person wasn't even making eye contact, and then just went on. There's no breakthrough. Sometimes stories, and this is different for me, if a story is so engaging, I don't want that person to necessarily cut it short or trying to summarize and speed it up. But I think as a guest, sometimes it's also, you have to be conscious of that it's a conversation and not a monologue,
100%. It's so funny. Like, I'm not going to say any names, but we had a guy on our podcast, and I had been looking forward to having this guy on because he's very high profile. And wow, this guy just carried on. Like literally, he almost just went through the whole thing. Like he would just go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And Craig and I were just like standing there, and we're like, oh, he's just going, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
But it's also a lesson for us as interviewers. You at some point you just need to be rude and you need to butt in somehow. It's an art to work out how to do it politely. But yeah, if you're an interviewee, definitely don't carry on for too long. Stop at a certain point and allow the person to ask you another question.
Yeah, exactly. I think with the for a guest, sometimes it feels awkward, but if you think of it this way, that number one, there's a reason for this to be an interview, and there's an opportunity for the interviewer to ask you really interesting questions because that person is interested. And thirdly is for listeners, it's actually really tiring and really exhausting on the ears to listen to the same person speak super fast, and especially when it sounds scripted for so long. I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an art on both sides, and I think the more you interview and the more interviews you do, the better you're going to become. But you have to have some sort of self-awareness too.
So the title for your podcast, the Ridiculously Human Podcast. How did you come up with that name? What was the urge?
It was a classic, just like. It just kind of happened. So, you and I have spoken about this before, and there's a way of coming up with ideas called brainwriting, which is similar, I guess, in a way to brainstorming. But Craig and I were just sitting down before we started our podcast, and we had a Google Docs open, or Google Sheet, I can't remember which one, and we just started writing down names, and some of them were just words, and I don't know, it was probably like 5 minutes into the process, and we'd written like all these different names, and I can't remember, one of us said ridiculous, and then there was like a human somewhere else in one of the other names, and then we started going through all of them again, and we just went, hey, what about ridiculously human? And we were like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. But is it a bit like, will people get it? Like is ridiculously a thing that all people will get? Because will they think it's stupid or what? But then we were like, no, this is, ridiculously is like a cool word. It's like a positive word. And we slept on it. And that was it. It was literally just a bit of brainwriting. And we probably came up with within 5 minutes. And we were pretty chuffed. We were like, that's quite a cool name. And it's interesting because a few of our guests, they were like, how could I not come on a podcast that's called the Ridiculously Human Podcast, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that was how we did it, Faye. That was how we did it.
When I talk to other podcasters, especially people starting out, and people struggle on the name, and it's almost painful and sad to watch that people will spend months, sometimes a year, just sit on the name with all these episodes waiting to be recorded. And people find that name is not changeable. I mean, I get it's not something you want to change every month, every year, but your podcast name is general. So did you find it easy to kind of brand or market your show, or do you find in some aspects difficult because it's now called the Passive Income Podcast or something super specific, a niche?
Totally. It's been something which Craig and I have spoken about literally since the day we started. We're like, okay, what is we say niche, just so you know, not niche or niche as in America. But so we constantly kind of battle with this. We're like, do we need to niche up? Do we need to niche up and find like our real true audience, who they are? We did write an avatar because I think that's important. We did do that at the start. So we have an idea of who our avatar is. And you read a lot of things like, Seth Godin, as we know, he says you've got to really find your minimum viable audience basically and target those people. You've got the story brand marketing stuff where it says you literally got a niche and stuff. So it is something that's constantly on our mind. But I think we actually have a niche anyway. Like maybe it's not a sub niche, but we have a niche, I think first of all, long form is a niche. There's not many people that are going to listen to an hour and a half podcast. But it is a challenge, and it is something we always speak about and think about. And I think you've constantly got to be evolving with whatever you do, So if it's not the niche, it must be something else that within your podcast which is changing. So you've got to strip away all the ego, anything that you ever have. If you want to progress, you've just got to constantly be evolving.
For sure. And how do you guys organize? I mean, I know it can be very chaotic. And on top of what you do for your consulting, your personal life and all that, how do you organize the emails you need to send, the one that have been sent, the ones that need follow-ups, and the ones that don't?
I think I don't know, it just seems to work pretty well, actually. So we have a group, should I say group? It's both Craig and I on the distribution list. So, and we always CC each other on every single email, so we know who you're inviting, and so we can keep a track of that. And then it's just we have a Google Doc spreadsheet, which we have. These are people that we've asked. This is the status. They're either booked. This is the date that they booked. And that's pretty much how we track it. And then we'll have like different folders in our email drive to keep the emails that they've sent and the email chains and stuff that's related to that guest. So it's pretty basic, to be honest with you. Part of the email process and the going back and forth a little bit is actually part of the relationship building for us. I think it's so important to be really polite, to be friendly, and to take an interest in people, especially on email. And we find that actually works quite well. So there's that's why we've kind of also not gone with the whole automated route too. But at some point we're going to have to get there, because when the podcast starts growing and you have other things going on in your life, it's a good way to make things a bit more efficient.
For sure. And so we're getting into some really interesting stuff. One thing that I've been really uncertain about and kind of just want to consult with you, which is, I wouldn't call it the deepest relationship with our guests, because some of the listeners who have stayed with us a lot longer and invested, more emotional effort and being part of the tribe. But with some of these guests, some more famous and renowned than the others, how do you keep in touch with them? And do you invite them to say, we love for you to join our newsletter, or for you to be part of our special, guest newsletter, or something along that line? Where I really did not do a good job at the beginning. I felt like I just kind of lost in touch with them once the interview's said and done. Yeah,
so it is a tough one for sure. We don't actually ask people to sign up to our newsletter. What we do is we're very good with actually keeping in touch with people. So definitely after each interview, about a week after or a few days after, we will send a thank you email, like a really nice thank you email, together with a whole load of files like audiograms, videos, pictures, etc. And we say, these are for you. And this is the link to the website, and this is the email campaign we sent out for you. If you'd like to share it or on your social media or on your website, that would be great. We'd really appreciate that. And then we just keep in touch with people on Instagram. We just liking people's stuff and commenting every now and then. People that, I'm talking about like previous guests is so important. You never know, like it's so important like to just keep that connection with your network and your guests and past guests.
Hi there, you're listening to the Feisworld podcast. This is your host, Fei Wu. Born and raised in beautiful South Africa, now living in London, Gareth Martin is a podcaster and executive lifestyle coach. We met through Seth Godin's ELT MBA. Change your question, change your life. What is your why not? I've been creating since I was a little kid. Podcast has been around for us for about 4.5 years. And I still experience some blocks, not so much of just creative blocks, but sometimes some of the self-doubts of, looking at the stats to think that now, like you said, the podcasting is even a more crowded place than it used to be. So when we started in 2014, a lot of excitement at the time that we weren't promoting as much and there were more downloads. And then it went through a period of us redefining ourselves. And now it's kind of steady, but I can feel like it's just more work and harder work to get the show and our message out there. And so do you feel the same way? And what do you do to yourself or for yourself to calm your mind to say, you know what, this is worth doing and I'm going to keep going? Because as you know, so many of us in the industry will stop doing that. And most people, more than 95%, will never even start. Like, what do you do?
So when it comes to not stopping, right, and dealing with the self-doubts and that, you and I both know Seth Godin well, and he's got an amazing book out there called The Dip. And I encourage everyone to read that book because it basically explains to you in very simple terms that the reason most people fail in businesses is because everything starts off amazingly, like you said, with your podcast. It starts off well and you're getting great numbers and stuff. And then you sort of hit a plateau and then things go down. And maybe it's numbers or just basically motivation and inspiration goes down and it goes right down. And you kind of feel like there's no way out of it. And that's where most people actually end up giving up. It's in the bottom, it's in the dip. But it's the people that persevere and the people that are patient. And I think this is the most important thing that I've found for myself in life, in business, is patience is going to eventually win. And you have to have extraordinary amounts of it in terms of whatever you're doing, because nothing happens as quickly as you want it to. And you always need to take a step back and recalibrate when times are difficult and remember why you're doing this. And if you can do that, then that journey up out of the dip becomes super enjoyable. We're also really lucky with our podcast because it's Craig and I. So we always have each other to egg each other on. And we constantly remind each other. We actually took a conscious decision not to worry about download numbers because it's hard, people don't necessarily talk about their download numbers like much. And it's because I guess everyone's, maybe shy or, you just don't want to, even maybe if you're doing really well, you don't want to boast, whatever. But most people are not getting ridiculous download numbers anyway. I think the reason why we do a podcast and why people should do a podcast is because you're really passionate about what you do. And you need to understand that this is actually a platform for other things. And we have to constantly remind ourselves of that every single time and enjoy those good moments. Enjoy when you get feedback. It's a difficult game, but I think this is like business in general. It's a long game. The really interesting part is, you take guys that have done really well in their life, say like, Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks about his YouTube videos, and he's like, for 2 years, people didn't really watch him. He had like seven subscribers or 7 likes or whatever you want to call it. And then Rich Roll, if you understand his story and you know about his story, he says that even early in the day, like he was an original podcaster.
Mm-hmm.
He said for the first 2 years he had no traction. So we have to always remember that the guys that are doing well now, they were in the boat that we are now. It might take 2 years, might take 3 years, but you just got to hang in there. But also make sure that you're enjoying the journey. Like you have to make sure you're enjoying it so that you can carry on. Find the goodness in it, find the joy and happiness in it, and that will keep you going.
And you said something, Gareth, or China, that you said this is just a platform, a springboard onto many other things. And for you, we start talking about, your coaching practice and such. Like, is there something that you could share with the listeners so they can learn more about you outside of podcasting?
Yeah, for sure. So, I now work as an executive and lifestyle coach. I've done that for about a year now. I was an investment banker for 18 years, and that was an amazing time. Like I loved it, and I learned so much, and I'm super thankful for that. But it was kind of never the end game for me. And I've been out of banking for 2 years now, and my first year was pretty much finding my feet, to be honest with you. I felt like a bit of a one-trick pony by leaving banking, because that's all I'd ever done. And it's kind of daunting when you go into this big wide world and there's like now all these other things and opportunities, and just to figure it out. Going from corporate to going to working to yourself is one of the most difficult things you can ever do, I think. But yeah, I've just found my passion, and I was always passionate about people and helping people. There's so many people that are in a confused state of their lives. And I think, and for me, if I have to niche it, it's people that are confused about what to do next in terms of work. So I was totally in that state. I knew that I wasn't destined to carry on working for the bank, and that I wanted to do something else. I wanted to escape. And that is a difficult process to go through, and a difficult transition. So anyone that is going through that sort of phase of their life, that they are wanting to go from corporate to do something themselves, I advise you to find somebody else who's done it, and to get them to kind of lend you a hand. And if you can get a coach and you can afford it, then definitely do that, because it saves you a lot of time and a lot of figuring stuff out on your own. Although I still think the figuring stuff out on your own is a good process to go through. It's a good learning process. But yeah, that's kind of me. That's what I do as opposed to the podcast.
I think I interview a lot of people in transitions, going through hardships, and you just mentioned that you had to figure out a lot of things going from full-time to working for yourself. What are some of the things that do you think, as in the first things that come to mind, that as part of a difficult transition for you? Was it mentally, spiritually, or is it financially? What was challenging in particular?
It was figuring out what to actually do, to be honest. I thought I was always very interested in health, and I thought I was going to train people, like to be a high-end sort of personal health coach or personal trainer. That obviously never happened. So for me, it was figuring out what to actually do. That's why I spent a year. It wasn't financial, because I'd planned 3 years, and I advise anybody that's going to do it, plan 2 years out if you're going to leave. Plan financially so that I had enough cash and enough runway that I didn't have to worry about it, and I wasn't stressed out about what I was going to do. So I spent my first year figuring out what I was going to do, and I went to India and I did a yoga training, meditation teacher training. I studied to be a chef for a year.
Amazing.
And it was just this full year of finding myself and discovering what I enjoyed and figuring out if that was going to work in a business or not. I did Seth Godin's MBA, same as you. The one that brought everything together was an executive coaching diploma that I did through the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and it was like a wake up moment. I was like, wow, this is what I'm actually meant to be doing. And I didn't do it in the start because I wanted to be an executive coach. I did it because I understand that there's an art and science to coaching, and I wanted to take that into the health side of things. But it just reminded me actually how much I like business, how much I like people. And, I think I'm able to share a decent story and help other people that are going through it. Because, Faye, what I remember in my last few years in banking is that nobody was enjoying their job whatsoever. Nobody, seriously. Like it used to be a great industry, but now it's quite a demoralizing industry because everybody is trying to, or all the banks are cutting costs and letting go of people, and nobody's safe. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. And it's not enjoyable anymore either. So I just know that there's lots of people, at least within banking, that feel like that. But I'm sure in other industries, there's lots of people that are the same as well.
Yeah. And I love what you said about after 18 years of banking, the first year coming out of that, financially you're stable, you're prepared yourself. That is super smart. I echo that completely. And the fact that you took a year off and just to experience things that are not even like completely unrelated to banking, yoga, fitness, and becoming a chef. And I think, I didn't do that in year one. I'm actually doing that sort of now. Now it's like year 3 or 4 into having Feisworld LLC that I thought, okay, I'm going to study fashion. I want to be able to make my own clothes, and then I'm going to work on a book. So I love mixing we know we have to do the work, but let's stay active. And you are a shining example of someone who is, really into fitness. You are fit, you're healthy, and therefore I think you can really think a lot more clearly as well, and being able to overcome some of the obstacles.
Yeah, I think to operate efficiently and to operate on the right level, you need to be healthy, and you need to be healthy on so many different levels. Your mental health is super important, but everything goes, everything contributes towards that, and your fitness, what you eat, how well you sleep. These are all really, really important. And actually, just touching on what you said there previously about trying new things, we literally live once, you know what I mean? And if you want to be an interesting person, and you want people to take an interest in you, and you want to have cool conversations with people, you've got to try new things, So like, it's so cool listening to you say that you're going to be studying fashion, and you've just done your video series and of Feisworld, and I can't wait to see that. I mean, these are amazing things that you're doing, and it's having all these branches to ourselves which make us interesting people, and people mustn't be scared to try new things. I was thinking about this a lot today, or this week at least. Like, in business, I think it is important to kind of niche up and find, what works, and find your people and these sort of things, so that it's easy for you and easy for them. But I think as an individual, it's almost the opposite. It's important to do as many things as you can, so you can learn about so many different things in life, so that you are an interesting person. And that's one way to live life. Of course, if you want to be an expert, then spend your time doing that. That's for sure. Go for it. But I think most of us are quite broad and round people, and the more we can try, the better it is for us.
Yeah, happier life, and just have more variety in life. My God, this has been wonderful. I think.
Cool stuff. Well, I mean, yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight speaking with you, Faye, and you're on a great podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi there, it's me again. I want to thank you very much for listening to this episode, and I hope you were able to learn a few things. If you enjoyed what you heard, it would be hugely helpful if you could subscribe to the Feisworld podcast. It literally takes seconds. If you're on your mobile phone, just search for Feisworld podcast in the podcast app on iPhone or an Android app such as Podcast Addict, and click subscribe. All new episodes will be delivered to you automatically. Thanks so much for your support.